The sound came before the sight, a deep, percussive thudding that rattled the windows of every house on Marsh Elder Road. Neighbors stepped onto their porches and looked up. A Black Hawk helicopter descended over the tree line, its rotors flattening the sawgrass as it settled onto the dirt clearing beside the last house on the road. Two naval officers stepped out and walked straight toward the porch where Garrett Cole stood with engine grease still on his hands. 1 week ago, he had turned down $1 billion. Now the United States military was at his front door. Have you ever wondered what it takes for the most powerful institution on earth to come find one quiet man? A week earlier, the morning had started the way every morning started in that house. Garrett was up before the sun, standing at the kitchen counter in the pale blue light, mixing pancake batter by hand. The kitchen smelled like coffee and maple syrup. Lily came down the stairs with her backpack already on, her hair still tangled from sleep. "You're early," he said. "I want to draw the boat before school." He set a plate in front of her. 2 pancakes, cut into quarters the way she liked. She ate fast, watching the window, watching the light come up over the Beaufort River. "It'll still be there after school," Garrett said. "I know. But the light's different in the morning." She was 10, and already thought about light. He watched her eat and felt the thing he felt every morning, the quiet certainty that this life, this small and ordinary life, was exactly what he had chosen and exactly what he would protect. He drove her to the bus stop in his truck, a 2004 Ford with a dent in the tailgate that he never bothered fixing. Then he drove to the waterfront, to the workshop he rented at the end of a gravel lane that dead-ended at the river. It was a tin-roofed building with a boat lift and a concrete floor stained with 30 years of motor oil. He was restoring a fishing boat for a shrimper named Earl, who had more trust in Garrett's hands than in any marina on the coast. The boat was a 1982 Carolina skiff with a rotted transom and corroded wiring. Most shops would have scrapped it. Garrett had rebuilt the transom with marine-grade plywood and epoxy, rewired the entire electrical system, and was now calibrating the fuel injection with a precision that made Earl uncomfortable. "You fix boats like you're building a spaceship," Earl had told him once. Garrett had just smiled. He was underneath the console, tracing a voltage drop, when a white county vehicle pulled into the gravel lot. A woman stepped out carrying a clipboard and a folder. She walked to the open bay door and waited until he slid out from under the dash. "Garrett Cole?" "That's right." She introduced herself as Claire Ashford, director of the Beaufort County Economic Development Commission. The county was reviewing properties along the riverfront corridor as part of a long-range development study. His workshop was in the survey area. She needed to document the site, take measurements, ask a few questions about his lease terms. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered everything she asked. Square footage, monthly rent, duration of occupancy. He was cooperative, unhurried, and precise. Every answer was exactly one sentence. No filler, no small talk. Claire paused at one point, her pen hovering over her clipboard. Most people in these surveys talk too much, explained themselves, worried aloud about what the county wanted. Garrett did none of that. He answered as though he were filing a report. "How long have you lived in Beaufort?" she asked. "Long enough." She looked at him for a beat longer than professional courtesy required. Then she thanked him and walked back to her car. As she pulled out of the lot, she glanced in the rearview mirror. He was already back under the console, as though she had never been there. On his workbench, beneath a stack of hull diagrams and wiring schematics, the corner of a document was visible. A faded letterhead. An eagle insignia. The words, "Defense Advanced Research Projects." Agency printed in small, precise type. 3 days later, a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the gravel lot at 8 in the morning. Garrett was at his bench, sanding a teak rail. He did not look up when the doors opened. He did not look up when the footsteps crossed the concrete. He only looked up when a shadow fell across his workbench and stayed there. Victor Haynes was 58 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had a personal trainer and a personal chef. His watch cost more than Garrett's truck. He wore a charcoal suit that had no business being in a boat shop, and he stood in the middle of the oil-stained floor as though he owned it. "Garrett Cole," Victor said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Victor Haynes," Garrett replied. Also not a question. Victor smiled. "So you know who I am. I know exactly who you are." Victor pulled a stool from the corner and sat down without being invited. He crossed one leg over the other, adjusted his cuff, and spoke the way men speak when they believe the outcome is already decided. I'll be direct. Haynes Defense Systems is building the next-generation maritime defense platform for the United States Navy. A $12 billion contract, the most significant naval defense project in 20 years, and the core architecture, the part that actually makes it work, was designed by you. Garrett said nothing. We've spent 3 years and $400 million trying to replicate your framework. We can't. The system fails every simulation. You know why. I know why. The Pentagon is starting to know why. Victor leaned forward. I'm offering you $1 billion. Equity in HDS. Your own lab. Unlimited resources. Come back. Finish what you started. Garrett set down the sandpaper. He looked at Victor the way a man looks at a storm he saw coming from a long way off. I designed Trident 9 to protect American sailors, Garrett said, not to make you rich. The answer is no. The workshop went quiet. Even the river seemed to pause. Victor studied Garrett's face for a long moment, searching for the crack, the hesitation, the place where $1 billion would find its way in. There was nothing. Victor stood. He buttoned his jacket. Everyone has a price, Garrett, even the ones who think they don't. He walked to the SUV. The convoy pulled away. Dust settled back onto the gravel. Garrett stood alone in his workshop, holding a piece of teak he had been sanding for a boat that belonged to a shrimper who would pay him $400. He had just turned down $1 billion. He felt nothing like victory. He felt the weight of what was coming. That evening, after Lily was asleep, he opened a locked drawer in his bedroom and took out an old phone. He dialed a number from memory. It rang 9 times. No one answered. He closed the phone and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, listening to the river through the open window. What Garrett did not know was that Victor Haynes had not come to Beaufort on impulse. The maritime defense system that HDS was building for the Navy, the $12 billion Trident program, had failed its 3rd consecutive simulation test 2 weeks earlier. The deadline for live sea trials was 6 weeks away. Pentagon officials were asking questions that Victor could not answer, and the only man alive who could make the system work had just told him no from a boat shop that smelled like diesel fuel and cedar. The retaliation began quietly. Within 48 hours of Victor's visit, Garrett's line of credit at Beaufort First National was frozen. No explanation. No warning. The branch manager, a man Garrett had known for 3 years, would not return his calls. Then the county moved. Claire received a directive from 2 members of the county council to accelerate the riverfront development timeline, specifically the parcel containing Garrett's workshop. The original schedule had the survey phase running through the end of the year. The new directive wanted preliminary acquisition assessments within 30 days. Claire read the directive twice. She had been in government long enough to recognize pressure that came from outside the system. Development timelines did not accelerate for no reason. Someone was pushing. And they were pushing on one specific piece of land. She drove back to the workshop. Garrett was outside this time, replacing a prop on a center console that belonged to a retired teacher. I need to tell you something, Claire said. Your parcel is being fast-tracked for potential acquisition. The timeline moved up significantly. I want you to know that this didn't come from my office. Garrett looked at her. Who's pushing it? I don't know yet. But it's not organic. Someone outside the county is applying pressure. He nodded slowly. There was no panic in his face, no confusion, just a quiet recalibration, the kind of adjustment made by someone accustomed to operating under pressure that most people never experience. Thank you for telling me, he said. Claire hesitated. She had dealt with dozens of property owners in her career, people who argued, who threatened lawyers, who called their council members. Garrett did none of that. He simply absorbed the information and asked the one question that mattered. It unsettled her in a way she could not articulate. I'll keep you informed, she said. If anything changes in the timeline, you'll hear from me before you hear from anyone else. Garrett looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. I appreciate that, he said, and the way he said it, quiet and without performance, made Claire believe that he did not hear those words very often and did not offer trust to many people. She got back in her car. Garrett watched her go. Then he walked inside, gathered every document from his workbench that was not related to boat repair, and locked them in a steel toolbox he loaded into his truck. He moved methodically, without haste but without wasted motion. It was the kind of packing a man does when he has practiced for contingencies that ordinary life does not require. That afternoon, he drove to the bank. The branch manager, a man named Porter who had shaken Garrett's hand every time he came in for 3 years, saw him through the glass partition and suddenly needed to take a phone call. Garrett waited in the lobby for 20 minutes. When Porter finally emerged, he could not meet Garrett's eyes. "It's out of my hands," Porter said. The decision came from above. He did not say above where. He did not need to. Garrett left without raising his voice. He drove home, sat in his truck in the driveway for a few minutes and looked at the house. The porch light was on. Lily's bicycle leaned against the railing. The oak tree in the front yard dropped acorns onto the roof with a soft, irregular rhythm. Everything about this place was ordinary, peaceful, and under threat from a man who could not accept the word no. That night, after Lily was asleep, Claire sat in her car outside the county office, laptop open on the steering wheel. She searched Haynes Defense Systems, Beaufort County. The results loaded: a memorandum of understanding between HDS and the Beaufort County Council for a proposed defense infrastructure project, signed 3 weeks ago. Claire had never been briefed on it. No one in her department had been consulted. She read the document twice, noting the signatures, noting which council members had approved it without public discussion. She stared at the screen. Victor Haynes did not just want Garrett's land. He wanted control of the entire corridor. The following Monday, a county inspector arrived at the workshop unannounced. Environmental violations. Discharge concerns. Permitting irregularities. Garrett answered every question calmly, produced every document the inspector asked for, and watched the man leave knowing that none of it mattered. The inspection was not about compliance. It was about pressure. By Wednesday, the phone calls started. Garrett's regular customers received calls from an unknown number suggesting that his workshop was under investigation for environmental contamination. 2 of them canceled pending jobs. A third showed up to collect his boat early, apologizing as he hitched the trailer. Earl, the shrimper, was the only one who did not cancel. "I don't care if the EPA itself calls me," Earl said. "You're the only man I trust with my boat." But one loyal customer could not keep a shop alive. In the evenings, after Lily was in bed, Garrett sat on the back porch and stared at the river. The marsh grass swayed in the tidal current. The stars were thick over Beaufort. He loved this place. He had chosen it because his wife had loved the coast, because Lily could grow up hearing the water, because it was as far from Washington and classified briefing rooms and defense contractors as he could get without leaving the country. Now Washington had found him anyway. On Thursday evening, Claire's car appeared at the end of his driveway. She walked up to the porch. This was not a county visit. She was not carrying a clipboard. "I found the connection," she said. "HDS signed a memorandum with the county council 3 weeks ago. A defense infrastructure project on the riverfront corridor. Your parcel is in the center of it. The pressure on your shop, the accelerated timeline. It's all connected to Haynes." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "You shouldn't get involved in this." "I'm already involved." He looked at her. In the porch light, he could see that she meant it. Not out of obligation, not out of professional duty, out of something harder to name, something that had to do with the fact that what was happening was wrong, and she was in a position to see it. For the first time, Garrett looked at Claire not as a county official, but as someone he might be able to trust. "It's bigger than the land," he said quietly, "but I can't tell you how." "Not yet." Claire did not push. She nodded, and she left. Inside the house, Garrett opened the locked drawer again. The old phone. He dialed the same number. This time, someone answered. The voice was tight, urgent, barely above a whisper. "I know what's happening. I'm working on it. But I can't move yet." "Not yet." "Stay safe, Garrett." The line went dead. Garrett closed the phone. He did not know when yet would become now. He only knew that the man on the other end of the line was the only person in Washington he still trusted. The next morning, Garrett arrived at his workshop to find the lock had been changed. A temporary seizure notice was posted on the door, signed by the county clerk's office, citing pending environmental review. Garrett stood in front of the closed door. He read the notice twice. He folded it neatly and put it in his back pocket. His hands were steady, but his fists, at his sides, were closed tight. Claire brought the fight into the open the only way she could. At the next county council meeting, she did not name Garrett. She did not name Haynes Defense Systems. Instead, she presented data. She had spent 3 nights pulling public records from other counties where HDS had established operations. Camden County, Georgia. Craven County, North Carolina. York County, Virginia. The pattern was identical in each one. HDS would sign a memorandum of understanding with local government. Properties in the target area would be fast-tracked for acquisition. Small businesses and residents would be pressured out through regulatory action. HDS would build its facility, bring in its own workforce, and within 2 years, every promise of local job creation would evaporate. She projected the data on the council chamber screen. Side-by-side comparisons. Employment numbers before and after. Property values. Small business closures. The numbers were devastating. The chamber was silent. 3 council members stared at their hands. One reached for his water glass and missed. Victor Haynes sat in the front row, invited as a guest of the council chair. His expression did not change, but his eyes, fixed on Claire, went cold. After the meeting, Victor invited Claire to lunch. She accepted, because refusing would have told him she was afraid, and she was not. They sat at a restaurant on Bay Street. Victor was charming. He complimented the county's development vision. He praised Claire's thoroughness, and then, between the salad and the main course, he leaned back and said, "Beaufort needs investment, Claire. Don't let one stubborn boat mechanic stand in the way of progress for an entire community." Claire set down her fork. He knew. He knew she was protecting Garrett, and he wanted her to know that he knew. "I appreciate the lunch, Victor," she said. "But I work for the residents of Beaufort County. All of them." She left before the entree arrived. That evening, she found Garrett at the public dock. His workshop was closed, but he was not idle. He was repairing a skiff for a neighbor, working on the dock with borrowed tools, charging nothing. They walked along the riverbank. The conversation drifted from the practical to the personal, not by design but by the natural gravity of 2 people who had been circling each other's orbits for days. "Why Beaufort?" Claire asked. Garrett was quiet for a few steps. "My wife loved the water," he said. "She grew up inland, always wanted to live where she could hear the tide." He did not say more. Claire did not ask. The silence between them held more weight than any explanation could have. They walked until the path ended at a stand of live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The river turned silver in the fading light. They stood there for a moment, side by side, not quite touching, before Claire said she should go. Garrett nodded. He watched her walk back toward the dock. Something shifted in his chest, something he had not felt in 4 years, and he let it pass without naming it. That night, Claire opened her laptop to find an email from an anonymous sender. No text in the body, just an attached file. HDS corporate filings from 3 counties, documenting the same pattern she had presented to the council, but with internal communications she had never seen. Memos discussing strategic property acquisition and regulatory leverage. The sender's address was a string of random characters. Untraceable. Claire saved the file and stared at the screen. She was building a case, but she needed more than data. She needed someone who understood what HDS was really after. What Claire did not know was that, inside Haynes Defense Systems, a crisis was accelerating. The Trident platform had failed its 4th consecutive simulation test. The live sea trial deadline was now 5 weeks away. Pentagon procurement officials had scheduled an emergency review, and a senior naval officer at the Pentagon had just reopened a classified personnel file. The file belonged to Garrett Cole. The man arrived in Beaufort on a Tuesday, wearing khakis and a fishing shirt, looking like every other tourist who came to walk the waterfront and eat shrimp. He asked a dockhand if he knew where to find the boat mechanic who worked at the end of the gravel lane. The dockhand pointed toward the public dock. Garrett was sitting on an overturned crate, replacing the water pump on a neighbor's outboard motor. He looked up when the shadow crossed his work. The 2 men stared at each other for 3 full seconds. "James," Garrett said. Commander James Whitfield sat down on the dock beside him. He was 45. Lean, weathered by salt air and classified stress. He spoke quietly, the way men speak when the words they are saying could end careers. "The system HDS is building," Whitfield said. "It's not just failing, Garrett. Victor knew it would fail. He signed the $12 billion contract based on your original Trident 9 architecture. He told the Pentagon his team could replicate it. They can't. They've been reverse engineering your framework for 3 years, cutting corners, removing safeguards, stripping out 3 critical defense layers to save cost and accelerate the timeline. Garrett's hands stopped moving. The version they're building looks like Trident 9 on paper, Whitfield continued, but it's missing the backbone. If they deploy it, if the Navy puts this system on active vessels and it faces real-world electronic warfare conditions, it will collapse. Total system failure. No countermeasures. No fallback. How many ships? Garrett asked. The Pacific Fleet. 7 carrier groups. The air between them changed. Garrett set down the wrench. He looked out at the river, but he was not seeing the river. He was seeing the thing he had spent 4 years trying to walk away from. Victor doesn't need me to finish the system, Garrett said slowly. He needs me to save a fraud. Whitfield nodded. And if you don't, and the system deploys as is, and it fails in theater. He stopped. How many people, James? Whitfield did not answer. The silence was the answer. Garrett sat with it, the weight of it. He had left Washington to protect his daughter, to give her a life that did not revolve around classified clearances and defense budgets and men like Victor Haynes, but the thing he had built, the thing he had poured 5 years of his life into before his wife got sick, was now a weapon pointed at the people it was designed to protect. I can't move through official channels yet, Whitfield said. Victor has allies on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He has people inside the Pentagon who owe him. I'm gathering evidence, but I need time. And I need you to stay safe until I have enough to act. Garrett nodded. Whitfield left Beaufort before dark. At the edge of the dock, he turned back. I'm sorry it took this long. I know, Garrett said. That evening, Claire came to Garrett's house. She had been digging deeper into the HDS files, cross-referencing the anonymous documents with public contract records. She had questions. Garrett opened the door, stood there for a moment, and then stepped aside to let her in. It was the first time. They sat on the back porch. The river was black and still. Fireflies pulsed in the marsh grass. Something happened today, Claire said. You look different. Garrett stared at the water. Everything is more complicated than you think it is. I'm not afraid of complicated. He looked at her then. She was sitting in the old wicker chair his wife had picked out at a yard sale 6 years ago. And she was not flinching, not hedging, not calculating her next move. She was just there, present, steady. I know you're not, he said. They sat in silence for a long time after that. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of things neither person is ready to say. Claire left when the fireflies dimmed. Garrett watched her taillights disappear down Marsh Elder Road and stood on the porch until the sound of her engine was gone. Later that night, Whitfield sat in his rental car at the Savannah airport, engine running, phone pressed to his ear. The call connected to a secure line at the Pentagon. I need emergency authorization, Whitfield said. And I need a helicopter. Victor made his final move on a Thursday. A feature article appeared in the Beaufort Gazette, written by a reporter who had received a detailed press packet from an unnamed source. The headline read, Mystery Boat Mechanic Blocks Beaufort's Biggest Economic Opportunity. The article painted Garrett as a recluse who was single-handedly preventing a defense investment that would bring 300 jobs to the county. It quoted anonymous council members. It cited economic projections. It did not mention Haynes Defense Systems by name, but it did not need to. By Friday, the town had turned. The woman at the hardware store avoided eye contact when Garrett came in for sandpaper. The man at the fuel dock served him but did not speak. Neighbors who had waved every morning now looked away. The narrative was set. Garrett Cole was the man standing between Beaufort and prosperity. Garrett absorbed it in silence. He had endured worse. He had sat in rooms where generals argued over systems that would determine whether aircraft carriers survived or sank, and he had kept his voice level through all of it. But this was different. This was not Washington. This was the place he had chosen. The community he had tried to belong to, and they were turning their backs not because of anything he had done, but because a billionaire had written a better story. That Saturday, the county council held a public forum on the riverfront development plan. The community center was packed. Victor sat in the front row, composed, confident. Council members spoke about jobs and growth and Beaufort's future. Claire asked for the floor. She stood at the podium and laid out everything. Not accusations, data. The 3-county pattern. the internal HDS memos, employment numbers that told a story of broken promises, property values that cratered after HDS moved in, communities that were used and discarded. She spoke for 12 minutes. When she finished, the room was silent. Victor's expression had not changed, but the temperature in his eyes had dropped 20 degrees. After the forum, Claire received a call from the county administrator. The council was recommending that she take administrative leave pending a review of potential conflicts of interest. Her position was being evaluated. The message was clear. She had crossed Victor Haynes, and Victor Haynes had made the call. Garrett found her outside the county building, standing by her car in the dark. He had heard. Someone had texted him, one of the few people in town who still would. This was the first time Garrett came to Claire, not because she had information he needed, not because the situation demanded it, but because something in him would not allow her to stand in that parking lot alone. "You shouldn't lose everything because of me," he said. Claire looked at him. Her eyes were steady, but there was a rawness underneath that she was not trying to hide. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it because it was right." Garrett held her gaze. Something passed between them, something that had been building since the first day she walked into his workshop with a clipboard. It was not gratitude. It was not alliance. It was the recognition that they were the same kind of person, the kind that does not bend when bending would be easier. And underneath that recognition was something warmer, something that neither of them was ready to name. They stood there in the dark. The streetlight buzzed overhead. Neither of them moved to leave. Later that night, alone in his house, Garrett opened the locked drawer one final time. He took out a small external hard drive, black, no larger than a deck of cards. Inside it was the complete original architecture of Trident 9. Every schematic, every algorithm, every safeguard that Victor's team had stripped out. He sat at his desk and held it under the lamplight. He had kept it as insurance, as proof, as a tether to a life he had tried to leave behind. Now it was the only thing that could stop a fraud that would put thousands of American sailors at risk. He set the hard drive on the desk, placed his hand flat on top of it, and closed his eyes. When he opened them, the decision was made. Morning. The day was clear and still, the kind of coastal morning where the air smells like salt and pine, and the river is so flat it looks like glass. Garrett stood on his back porch with a cup of coffee, watching a heron pick its way through the shallows. The sound reached him before the sight. A low, rhythmic thudding from the south, growing louder, growing closer. The heron lifted off the water and banked hard toward the tree line. The coffee in Garrett's mug trembled. The Black Hawk came in low over the marsh, rotors beating the air into submission. It circled once, then descended onto the clearing beside his house, the same clearing where Lily rode her bike on weekends. Dust and grass and loose leaves spiraled upward in the rotor wash. Doors opened. 2 naval officers stepped out first, followed by a third figure, Commander James Whitfield. This time he was not wearing khakis and a fishing shirt. He was in full dress uniform, insignia polished, rank shining on his shoulders. He walked toward Garrett with the bearing of a man who had fought through 17 layers of bureaucracy and a Senate committee to get authorization for this moment. Neighbors emerged from their houses. The same neighbors who had stopped waving. They stood on their porches and in their yards, watching 2 Navy officers and a decorated commander walk toward the boat mechanic at the end of Marsh Elder Road. Whitfield stopped at the porch steps. "Garrett, James, the Pentagon needs you, not for HDS, not for Victor Haynes, because what you built is being threatened, and you're the only person who can prove it." Garrett looked past Whitfield at the helicopter, its rotors still turning, its engine idling with the patient hum of a machine that had nowhere else to be. He looked at the neighbors watching from their yards. He looked at the river beyond the tree line, the river his wife had loved, the river his daughter drew in her sketchbook every week. Then he looked back at Whitfield and nodded. A car appeared at the end of Marsh Elder Road, moving fast. Claire, she had heard. Someone had called her, or she had seen the helicopter from the highway, or she had simply known. The way people know when something that matters is happening. She stopped at the edge of the property and got out. She stood by the fence, taking in the scene. The military aircraft, the officers, and Garrett standing in the center of it all with the same quiet composure he had shown the first day she met him, as though this world of classified systems and billion-dollar stakes, was the one he had always belonged to. Garrett saw her. He walked over. The officers waited. Whitfield waited. Even the helicopter seemed to wait. "I'll come back," Garrett said. Claire nodded. She did not ask where he was going. She did not ask how long. She understood, in the way that people who have stood beside each other through something difficult understand, that this was not goodbye. It was an intermission. Garrett turned and walked to the helicopter. In his hand was a black bag, and inside the bag was the hard drive. He was not going to Washington to build a system for Victor Haynes. He was going to prove that Victor Haynes had committed fraud against the United States military, and to protect the sailors that a counterfeit defense system would have left exposed. He stepped into the Black Hawk. The door closed. The rotors accelerated. The helicopter lifted off, banked over the Beaufort River, and disappeared into the southern sky. Claire stood at the fence and watched until the sound was gone. The story moved fast after that. At a classified facility outside Washington, Garrett presented his evidence to a joint review panel, Navy procurement officials, Pentagon engineers, and 2 representatives from the Inspector General's office. He placed the original Trident 9 architecture beside the HDS version, component by component, layer by layer. The differences were damning. HDS had removed 3 critical electronic countermeasure layers, the very systems designed to protect carrier groups from coordinated electronic warfare attacks. They had replaced adaptive threat response algorithms with static protocols that would fail under real-world jamming conditions. The system HDS had promised, the Navy looked identical to Trident 9 on a spec sheet. In combat, it would have been a hollow shell. The panel's report reached the Secretary of the Navy within 24 hours. The $12 billion HDS contract was suspended. The Senate Armed Services Committee opened a formal investigation into defense procurement fraud. The FBI initiated a parallel inquiry. HDS assets in Beaufort County were frozen pending investigation. Victor Haynes sat in his Charleston hotel suite and made phone calls. He called every contact he had in Washington, every senator who had taken his donations, every Pentagon official who had attended his dinners. No one answered. He called a second time, a third. The calls went to voicemail. Every one of them, a cascade of silence from people who had been happy to take his money and attend his galas and sit in his luxury box at football games. When the United States military decides to act, money and connections stop being currency. The men who had smiled at Victor's fundraisers were now calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from his name. Back in Beaufort, the county council quietly reversed every development decision connected to HDS. The Memorandum of Understanding was rescinded. The accelerated acquisition timeline was canceled. The environmental review of Garrett's workshop was closed with no findings. No council member acknowledged having supported the original plan. Memories in local government, it turned out, were remarkably selective. Claire was reinstated. The same council that had suspended her now praised her integrity, her thoroughness, her commitment to the community. She accepted the reinstatement because the work mattered, but she remembered who had stood with her when standing had a cost, and who had only stood up after the cost was gone. The people of Beaufort read the news. They saw Garrett Cole's name in national reports, not as a boat mechanic, but as a former chief engineer at DARPA, the architect of one of the most critical naval defense systems in American history, a man who had walked away from power to raise his daughter by the water, and who had been dragged back in to stop a fraud that could have cost thousands of lives. The reactions came in quietly. No one apologized in words. The owner of the hardware store left a case of marine varnish outside the workshop door with no note. The fuel dock attendant filled Garrett's tank and waved off the payment. Earl showed up with a cooler of shrimp and a six-pack, and sat on the dock without saying much of anything. Garrett called Lily from Washington the night before he left. She answered on the first ring. "When are you coming home, Dad?" "Tomorrow, sweetheart." "Promise?" "Promise." He drove home in his truck, not in a helicopter, not in a government vehicle. In the 2004 Ford with the dent in the tailgate, the windows down, the radio off, the salt air coming in as he crossed the bridge into Beaufort. He drove past the waterfront, past the dock where he had sat with Whitfield, past the community center where Claire had stood at the podium and refused to back down. He turned onto the gravel lane and parked in front of his workshop. The lock was his again. The seizure notice was gone. Inside, the shop was clean. Someone had swept the floor and opened the windows. His tools were where he had left them. The Carolina skiff sat on the lift, waiting. He set his bag down, put on his work apron, and opened his toolbox. Back to work. That afternoon, the school bus stopped at the end of Marsh Elder Road and Lily jumped off before the doors were fully open. She ran down the gravel lane, through the open bay door, and threw her arms around Garrett's waist. He lifted her up and held her. She pressed her face into his shoulder and squeezed with the ferocity of a child who had spent too many nights listening for a truck that was not there. They walked to the dock and sat with their legs hanging over the edge, feet above the water. The tide was coming in. A pelican dove into the channel and came up with a fish. "Dad?" "Yeah?" The helicopter was really loud. He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in weeks, and the sound of it carried across the water like something released. He kissed the top of her head. The sun was warm. The river moved beneath them. This life, this small and ordinary and irreplaceable life, was intact. The workshop stayed open after that. Customers came back. Not all at once, and not all of them, but enough. A steady current of boat owners and fishermen and weekend sailors who needed someone they could trust with the things that carried them on the water. Garrett took every job, charged fairly, and never mentioned what had happened. The town followed his lead. The crisis became something people referred to only indirectly, the way coastal communities refer to a storm after the debris has been cleared. It happened. They got through it. They moved on. Some things were different. The council approved new transparency requirements for outside development proposals. Claire's office was given oversight authority it had never had before, and on Saturday mornings, Earl started bringing 2 coffees to the dock instead of 1, sitting with Garrett in silence, watching the boats come and go. It was his way of saying what he would never say out loud. The day was ending when Claire's car pulled into the gravel lot. Garrett was wiping down his tools, the last light of the afternoon coming through the open bay door in long amber shafts. He heard the engine and looked up. She walked across the concrete floor carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was not there in any official capacity. She was there because she wanted to be. She handed him a cup without a word. He took it. Their fingers touched for a half second, and neither of them pulled away. They walked to the open door and stood side by side, looking out at the Beaufort River. The water was gold and copper in the sunset. A sailboat moved slowly toward the bridge, its mast catching the last light. Somewhere in the marsh, a nightbird called. They stood close enough that Claire's shoulder rested against Garrett's arm. A small thing, the smallest thing, but it carried the weight of every moment that had brought them to this spot, every choice, every silence, every time one of them had stood firm when the world pushed. Neither of them spoke. The coffee cooled in their hands. The river darkened. The first stars appeared over Paris Island. Neither of them had been looking.